Well, welcome back to our afternoon session. We'll begin with what I think is an especially rare treat. It's not often you get to hear from multiple CIA directors at the same place, at the same time, speaking on the record. I would like to welcome to the stage our moderator, the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, the Honorable Sue Gordon, along with the Honorable John Brennan, the Honorable and General Michael Hayden, the Honorable Porter Goss, and the Honorable Judge Webster. Thank you.
So how lucky are we? I think I may be the first moderator in this program's history who has the joy of saying that she worked for everybody that was on this panel. So, gentlemen, I'm gonna try and make you proud. This is remarkable. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a little bit of a romp through both their history and perspective from their tenures, and then comment on the issues that we're facing today and see if we can't get a bounce back and forth. First question is for each of you.
Not very clearly. Can you look at us when you address us?
Yes, sir.
When you're addressing them, fine.
I love that.
We're getting a back echo.
I love that. So first question for each of you. What was the greatest threat or issue that consumed your tenure? And what do you see the greatest threat or issue that is facing the nation today from a security perspective? John, because you're on my left, you get to go first.
And we're setting aside Congress as an answer here?
We'll get to Congress.
It was one of the real challenges I had when I was director, because I had to deal with the oversight committees, and particularly the report that came out of the Senate committee on the detention interrogation program, which I had to fight quite a bit because I thought it was very one-sided and did not highlight just the tremendous work that CIA did for so many years keeping this country safe. So that consumed a lot of my time, and unfortunately I think there was a lot of partisanship that went into that. But that said, one of the real challenges that I've faced, and I think this administration is facing too, is just there are so many issues of strategic consequence and importance. The pace was frenetic. You deal with issues like North Korea and terrorism and cyber and Russia and China, and constantly go back down to the White House Situation Room to be in principals meetings or National Security Council meetings, and these are issues that have some very weighty issues attached to them and decisions, and it really takes a lot of time to understand and absorb and make sure you understand exactly what the implications are of certain moves or whatever, particularly since the United States is the only global power that has a role basically in every part of the world. And so the pace and intensity of the issues became such that it was really difficult to deal not just with the wolves at the door, to make sure you prevent the next terrorist attack or cyber attack, but also dealing with some of those issues that maybe were on the back burner and you kept trying to pull them up to the front burner, North Korea ballistic missile and nuclear programs and, space conflict and other things. It is trying to strike that balance, and the intelligence community and CIA is so integral to all of that. From an analytic standpoint, from a collection standpoint, from trying to make sure that you provide the knowledge and enlightenment that policymakers need in order to carry out their responsibilities. So when I compare what's going on right now to 20 years ago or so, what I find is just the pace of information and the deluge and just how quickly things happen in this technologically advanced world, it just makes the intelligence profession so much more challenging, but also at the same time so much more important.
Fantastic. We'll come back to some of those themes. Mike.
So you asked what was the primary danger
Dominance.
in office, and then what I
you
do
see
now.
today.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in office, I was director 06 to 09, and we were pretty much still in the all hands on deck battle stations for counterterrorism. So it consumed a great deal of the time We had a great deal of the energy of the agency writ whole. That was not without cost. We knew there was a cost. I tell the story of Dave Petraeus coming to see me prior to his confirmation hearings and asking the kinds of questions you'd expect an incoming director to ask a former. And then as we're leaving the House, I did that Washington pull-aside thing, and I said, David, one more thing. CIA's never looked more like OSS than it does right now. And that's a good thing. America's safer. But you know, it can't be the only thing. It's the nation's global espionage service and needs to address some of the questions John was suggesting. So it was CT as a big chunk. I'm going to be very candid too with regard to what it is I would worry about now. Us. Okay, not CIA us, the United States us. I have been saying for the last several months, the most disruptive element in the world today is the United States. It's not because we're being aggressive or we've got legions ready to cross borders or anything like that. But we're in a massive transition globally. We have assumed a particular and peculiar role for the last 75 years. The foundation on which that role was based, Bretton Woods and all that, is eroding. And the rest of the world is simply looking at us and saying, so where are you guys on 2.0? Because 1.0 you created and you sustained, and now they're asking, what is it you view your role to be? And until that question is answered, I do think that the globe is in a whole lot of white water until we answer that question.
Good. Porter.
Well, back in 2003 and 2004 and so forth, the whole game was radical Islam and how to deal with it. We had Iraq and combat troops and how to support them and how to exploit the capabilities that we had in the intelligence community and how to deal with what was a new thing, asymmetric warfare of a type we'd never seen, abstract in some ways, dealing with things that we really hadn't been set up for. The intelligence community was called on very definitely. Mission one is to make sure we stay safe, and two is to deal with the enemy as we see them out there, find them, identify them, know them better. Basically, the battlefield as Mike described. All of this is going on, incidentally, at the same time that Congress decides to impose its wisdom on the architecture of the intelligence community and change it. This means that the plane you're flying in when you took off may not be the plane you're flying in when you land, and you're supposed to redesign it while you're flying. This was a tough complication, so I say. I started out as DCI, ended up as DCIA, and finally retired. And of the three, I think the latter one may have been the best choice. It was interesting times, but I'm very proud of the men and women in the agency and what they did to take up the slack that we had in our approach to enemies who were brand new to us in a way we had never really seen or experienced before. A lot of innovation, a lot of challenge that wasn't on a shelf that we could pull off the solution for, either over at Defense or at State or any place else, FBI. And suddenly we had to bring all that together, and it had to be well informed with good information. That was job one, rebuilding what had been the hollowed out operational core of the Central Intelligence Agency and all our defense programs, plus the other agencies that were involved as that team effort. I think there were 15 agencies at that time. Today, I couldn't agree more with Mike on what the problem is. It's us. Go right through the litany. Obviously, we've still got the radical Islamic war and terrorist problems. Obviously, they've taken a slightly different turn and create new problems there. That's a huge threat, as we've seen and continue to see everywhere. We have nuclear proliferation, which is right on the front page staring us in the face, whether it's North Korea, Iran, or some other way. So nuclear proliferation hadn't gone away. The macro aggressors haven't gone away. That would be Mr. Putin and perhaps Xi Jinping, whether they're friendly or not friendly, or how we treat them or how we go about our business with them is very, very important, but there's no question that those are areas that we have to pay attention to, because if they aren't on the front page above the fold today, they will be tomorrow. I think those are critical. Cyber, everybody comes to as that's the one we've got to watch because we have the greatest dependency and the most vulnerability in terms of our cyber. We've created this incredible basis of how we do business in this country, and if we had something that took that system out, and I can think of several things that might, which I won't say in public because I don't want to give anybody ideas, we would be sort of helpless. Look how helpless Florida was in a recent hurricane, how Puerto Rico is today without power in the grid. When you talk about the solutions to the problems of dealing with those four things and other things, you'll find that Washington has failed us on coming up with the rules of engagement on how to deal with so many things. It isn't just radical terrorism, it's how we deal with cyber, it's how we deal with publications, how we deal with leakage. All of these things are out there. And as Mike has underscored, there is a deep divide in this country right now which is causing us not to get at the solutions we need to be what we are, which is the greatest force for good on the continent and in the whole world. Amen.
Judge Webster, I'm sorry, you've got to follow that.
I'm not running for anything.
I took your question a little differently, but as I listened to Porter, I think that I'm not far off from my concern. My consistent threat for the years I was there fell within the pattern of intergovernmental relationships, which, in my opinion, presented an obstacle to our doing our work effectively. And it was a problem on both sides of the aisle. And when I came on board because the Congress had doubts about the credibility of what they were hearing from us about such things as the Iran-Contra deal, arms for hostages, issues of that kind. And we decided to address that issue. I'll jump over because this one came out well. We decided that part of the problem was that when our people spoke to the congressional closed committees, the closed hearings, they were concerned about, some of them were concerned about the gargoyles that they saw sitting around the room that they didn't recognize and didn't trust, so the distrust was mutual. So they danced around the questions, and they did it in a way that caused considerable lack of trust with the members of the congressional committees. And with the help of some others, we took it on in a very simple way. We said, now look, from now on, all our testimony must be accompanied by 4 C's. It must be correct, candid, complete, and consistent. Okay, there are guiles out there that you don't trust. You hear a question that you don't feel comfortable answering because you don't know who's in there or what they're all about. Don't say you don't have an answer. Say you have an answer, but you're not authorized to give it. You'll take the question back to headquarters. Headquarters will work with congressional staff to satisfy their needs. It was amazing how that criticism ended for that period of time. Looking for solutions to deal with threats that were interfering with our doing our work. Later on, it became more difficult because we got into issues of Desert Storm and Desert Shield. When do we go from Desert Shield, which was the aerial attack, to the ground attack of Desert Storm? And President Bush had said, when you have degraded 50% of their hardware. The problem was we were not seeing it the same way the pilots were seeing it. And we were relying on space imagery, what we could see from the sky about what was true on the ground. And I mentioned it shows you how these things work. I mentioned it to President Bush during a briefing. I said, I think you ought to know we're having some problems agreeing. You got so many points every time the percentages went up when we gave our reports on the kills for the day and so on. And he said, you mean pilot euphoria? He was youngest pilot in World War II, but he's also been director of the CIA. And I said, Mr. President, those are your words. We had a tough time with that on credibility, because that determined when we would launch the ground war. And we worked hard on it to try to get it. A lot of people thought that we had a policy interest in it. And it was important that we were not making policy. We were providing the intelligence upon which wise policy decisions should be made. And that should never be questioned. Well, we worked through that one. And when we decided, because we weren't trying to dissuade them from launching the ground attack. We were simply reporting that we weren't getting there as fast as the pilots wished and thought we had. That over the years affects the ability, our ability to serve the government leaders depends on the level of trust and how they feel we are being square with them, and just as importantly, that they are being square with the American people about where we were. So I think that will always be a recurring challenge to the nature of their jobs, the nature of our jobs. But it's a serious threat if it's not addressed in the way that I suggest there are solutions to it.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that the intelligence community has the same view of the importance of the integrity of the process and the confidence of the people with whom we're talking. And it is exactly as difficult as you suggest to continue to maintain that. Porter, you mentioned China, Russia, North Korea, to name Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, as issues that were vexing you then and are present now. Anything surprising about the threats or the activities of those large, persistent threats that you see today? Anything surprising about what Russia's doing, what China's doing, the expansionism we see from China, Russia's move into perception management and managing their reputation? Anything surprising to you?
I would start by going to something that I recently read in a book by Graham Allison, reminded me of the Thucydides trap. Yep. This is not new. This has been going on since recorded history, that you have one group in power and then another group starts to spin up, and then can they work out an accommodation to share the planet together or not? And I think that where we are with the hegemon of these other great, what I will call aggressive powers, because they are clearly aggressive. Putin is a person that many people think about, and many have forgotten that Putin has not forgotten that we divided the USSR and worked very hard to undermine Russian influence with the CIS, the Confederate States, after the wall came down and all that. So is it surprising that we have a cyber operation going on against the United States of America and our free, democratic, open society, which is about as exposed to anything as anybody wants to put out there, and now with social media, which is in no way sort of regulated or verified, it's just gossip, so to speak. So are we surprised? No, we're not surprised. Is the intelligence community forgotten this? No, the intelligence community is on top of it. The intelligence community has a limited amount of capability resource. And that's one of the jobs I think all of us have as formers, is to make sure American people understand it's a great investment to have Congress give a sufficient amount of money for the intelligence people to do their job. I think that's very important to keep your eye on that ball. China is clearly moving. Many feel this is the century of China. So these are clearly things that you have to worry about. But do I see a dust-up tomorrow morning from Putin or Xi Jinping saying the ultimatum is now or obliteration? No, I don't see that. What I see here is a long, gradual working that is going to corrode or erode our influence or provide an alternative, which we may not like, to other people in the world, most of whom are now controlled by authoritative governments of one type or another. So I think that's a very important background item. But if you said, am I more worried about the grid going down this afternoon and all banking stop or something like that. That's something that could be on the president's desk very quickly. Those are the kinds of differences I would make. And I obviously don't think that you want to say, we only do one at a time.
To John's point, right? That's one of the greatest challenges. You can't do one at a time.
Well, John's point is very well taken, and he served at a time when it makes my job look very easy. I just had a war to fight. I mean, he had a lot of wars to fight.
Mike.
Yeah.
So you described one of your greatest threats as us.
Yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase the kind of lack of global leadership or certainty of where we're going. If you take what Porter said about China and Russia moving out aggressively, does the fact that there's a little more space for them to take some of that moral imperative, is that a concerning issue to you?
Sure. So I teach across the river at another university, George Mason, and occasionally I have David Sanger come over for one of my classes, New York Times correspondent. He's written the kind of the first draft of history for the Bush administration, security policy, and then Confront and Conceal, which was the first Obama administration. So he spends 75 minutes laying out all the, I said, okay, Dave, that was really interesting. 2 sentences. What's President Obama trying to do? And David's answer was, he is trying to better align the definition of American interests with the realities of American power. Now, that's an unarguable proposition, all right? Now, I freely participate in arguing that he's getting the math wrong when he was president, all right? But now we've got another American president who's America first, all right, isn't a 9-iron away from retrenchment. It's at best a chip shot. There is some surprising, put the language away, all right, that's very different, but there is surprising continuity in policy in America pulling back. As a military guy, I know the most difficult of all maneuvers is retreat, because it can turn into rout. And so, and I'm not saying we're retreating, that's not the right word, but if we are recalibrating, again, balancing our interests with the realities of our power, we need to do that very, very carefully, and I don't think we are. I think we're leaving the space that you've suggested. I think there's a bit of a vacuum, the lack of a pushback in the Ukraine that emboldened the Russians to do certain things. We certainly left a big chunk of the stage vacant in Syria that allowed the Russians to go back into the region for the first time in half a century. So I get the balancing, and I'm looking at John because he's most recently in government. I mean, it's the things he's delivering to the policymakers that try to set the framework so they can get the balance right. And I don't think we've gotten the balance right, and I do think we've created space, and other states have pushed into the space. Now, Sue, that's very different from saying, that's our line, you can't come across, we don't need to accommodate the growth and power of the People's Republic of China. Of course you do. But I do think we're getting the fine print from time to time very wrong.
John?
Yes.
I didn't recount your bio, but you, as well as others in this panel, have served both in the intelligence community and in the policy community. You in the intelligence community, Porter, you in the legislative, Judge, you, FBI, intelligence. But John, let's start with you. Talk to me about the intersection between intelligence and policy, and then we can add in intelligence and the other elements of the American system.
Well, I spent 25 years at CIA and trying to learn the intelligence profession, an exceptionally rewarding but challenging one, and then had the opportunity to be on the policy side of the intelligence policy relationship. And I must tell you, policy is really hard. Governance, certainly in the 21st century, is really hard. All the issues that we've pointed out here, they're all challenges and problems that are fraught with all sorts of national security implications. And for each one of them, whether you go from North Korea to Syria to Ukraine to cyber, all of them defy easy solutions. And I think my time on the policy side really made me appreciate just how difficult it is to try to strike that right policy balance that's going to protect and advance U.S. interests without making some situations worse. And I think we've had experiences over time where U.S. might and power, hard power, was exercised in different parts of the world, and it really didn't go all that well. And I don't want to defend policies of either the last administration or previous ones, but I found it really quite enlightening to be on that policy side of the table, and intelligence usually did a great job of pointing out all the risks and challenges in front of it, and over to the policymaker then to be able to do what is necessary. I must tell you, having worked at the White House as President Obama's assistant for counterterrorism and homeland security for the first term, there are some really weighty decisions that fall on presidential shoulders that entail putting U.S. lives at risk. And I think for all the presidents that I served for, 6 presidents, from Obama back to Reagan, I think all of them took exceptionally seriously their obligations to put U.S. lives at risk only when it was necessary and in order to protect U.S. national security interests. And getting back to Mike's point now, the world is very unsettled. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil that is out there, and for a variety of reasons. But the uncertainty about the U.S. role, particularly in places where our partners and allies have relied on us for so many years, and now they're concerned, what does this mean as far as U.S. support? Under what conditions, under what scenarios, even questions about Article 5 obligations on the part of NATO. So I'm not going to, again, defend or criticize policies, but I must say that trying to figure out exactly how to deal with conundrums, and that's what they are, whether it be North Korea or Afghanistan or others, they're not easy policy answers. And that's why intelligence needs to do the best job it can pointing out not just the pitfalls and the calamities, but also opportunity analysis. What are the things that the U.S. can do that might, in fact, help to mitigate some of the threats that are out there? That's a critical role because intelligence professionals frequently can see these issues a little bit more clearly because they have worked them so in depth. And what I found was I was most impressed with policymakers who really went to school on these issues, read the memos and the papers, absorbed it, understood that there are some real second and third and fourth order effects by what the United States does or even what the United States says. That is critically important.
Porter, take the same question and talk about intelligence in the Congress.
Well, looking at it from the combination of experience I've had in the Hill and the executive branch, what I would come down to is a meeting I remember very well in the White House. And I was asked by important people sitting around a table in a secure room, do you have the capabilities in the intelligence community to get this information? The answer was yes. And do you have the authority to get this? And the answer again was yes. Long pause. But sir, I don't have the policy. And that was a huge problem back in 2004 and 2005 about rules of engagement. Can we do this? Can we do that? Are these enemy combatants? Are these terrorists? What do we do with these people? Do we try them in a civil court? Everything was a new question. So the whole problem of trying to come down to our role of saying, look, sir, these are the facts that we have, and we can do this and this if you want response, but what we want to do is inform you first. You make the policy, and then we'll tell you if we should be part of the response, and what we can do as part of the response. That was a very hard lesson to seem to get through because there were so many things happening, as Mike said, and as John said, day to day that were taking your eye off the ball because you had to go deal with what was happening in Iran that morning or someplace else. The second thing I would point out on this is very, very important, and everybody's hit on it a little bit. The way I express it is the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, word of the year for 2016 was post-truth. Post-truth. That's where we are today, at post-truth. Now, what happens when you don't have truth? You don't have a lot of trust, and you don't get a lot of things done. And so you back that up a little further, and you say, how has this damaged the intelligence community's role to do policy? The answer is it's actually pretty clear, because there is so much politicization of everything that is going on today that it is hard to have the trust that gets you to a point where you have confidence in the answer that is the true answer. Am I talking to the right person? Am I hearing the right thing? Do I believe this? Have they asked all the right questions? That's a crisis. Every president, the last 3 presidents, have pointed out and said there is a crisis of confidence going on, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And I think that perhaps it's important to say that there's a partner in that, and that is one that gets me in trouble a lot, called the media. And I would dare say that we're talking about the ethos of intelligence, which I think is strong and good and beneficial to America. Can't say the same thing about the media, and I used to be in the newspaper business. And I will just simply say this. I think that we gave way for accuracy to get speed, we gave way from speed to get sensation, and now we seem to don't worry about whether it's true or not. It's just, is it an important subject? It doesn't matter that it's true. If it's an important subject, we'll put it above the fold on the front page. Do I have an example? Sure. How about Duke lacrosse? How about the University of Virginia system down there with Rolling Stones? Oh, let's take it home to the intelligence community. How about Gary Sick, October surprise? That was a total scam. These are the things that have caused people to doubt the veracity of what they're seeing on television and hearing on television and reading in the media. That has created part of this problem, because now when the intelligence guy gets up and says something in public, is it politicized right off the bat, or is it credible because he's a person of the intelligence ethos?
So,
honestly, I'm not campaigning for anything, but I feel this very, very deeply.
but let me take that a little less political and say just the reality of the openness of a world. You know, I'm old. I talk about the Soviet Union. We were the first ones that knew about launches of missiles that no one had didn't know existed because it happened beyond the horizon and no one could see it. And now I know when North Korea launches a missile first when CNN reports it. So there is so much more information openly available, so many former intelligence officials that are now out in the private sector bringing the craft of intelligence to the business community in the world. There are so many other, not just the media, but other opinions that sound a lot like the same truth. So let's talk about the dialogue that the intelligence community needs to have with the American people. Right? One of the reasons that this event exists, John, is because that's one of the things that you were trying to create, is to get our conversation out with the American people. So there was more confidence in what we had to say, so the craft that we had could be represented. So the perspective was not just born of someone commenting on it. So how are we doing in that conversation with the American people? And Judge, I want to get to you, but I'm going to start with John because he kind of started this thing. Let's just talk amongst yourselves in terms of how we're doing, sharing.
You're our most
Yeah.
I think General Hayden is by far the most articulate spokesperson for intelligence, and I take nothing away from any else. But Mike has gotten it right a lot.
Well, and he carried a lot of water when the community couldn't figure out how to get out there and speak in the way we needed to. So I would agree with that, Porter. So Mike, you want to start instead of John?
So I think.
Hey, we
you
are
owe me
very
big.
No, that's fine.
We are a very democratic.
On behalf
We are
of
a very
intelligence
democratic panel
leadership to
here.
Let the articulate one do it.
Am I on? Okay.
to try and
Well, all
restore
you're doing is you're a
credibility
warm-up
in
act for Judge Webster.
All right. So I think you need to parse this in two layers. All right. There is number one, the portion of our craft that remains a government monopoly, and the portion of our craft that is no longer a government monopoly. All right? And that's a big chunk of the old craft. And so I think John's purpose in launching this is that we need to better explain the portion of our craft that is a government monopoly to the broader American society. That they are no longer, Porter, they're no longer willing to outsource legitimizing what we do to the committees.
True.
All right?
Absolutely.
They want to know more themselves. All right? And that's part of a broad societal trend that there's no interest in pushing back against it. That's happening. And so we have to, again, back to our monopoly box, we have to better explain it, more fully explain it. And I fully understand that's probably going to shave some points off of effectiveness, but they're not going to let us do any of it unless they have faith in what it is we're doing, and we've got to show that. Now, the other part is the stuff we used to do that used to be a government monopoly and is no longer a government monopoly. And so we now live in a much richer information age. And here, I think our challenge is, how do we create a membrane that's more permeable from our monopoly circle out to the no longer a monopoly circle, all right, so that we can harvest, take advantage of the wisdom being created in the broader society without putting at undue risk the stuff that has to stay secret. And I think that is kind of the metaphysical challenge we have now as a craft.
I can just add one thing. I think the trust and confidence of the American people in the intelligence community and intelligence professionals would be stronger if the first customer of the intelligence community's work accepted unambiguously the unanimous position of the intelligence community in terms of Russian interference in the election. But when that first customer does not accept that, and when that first customer denigrates that work and the work of the professionals within the intelligence community, how then can the American people embrace the work and the mission of the intelligence community? So there is a real disconnect there that has unfortunately undermined what the great women and men of the intelligence community who put their lives on the line and work 24/7 and their families sacrifice things. And so if there was greater acknowledgement of the professionalism and the integrity of that work and those people, I think the American people then might be a little bit more accepting of the importance and value of the intelligence.
And I'm sitting here between John and Porter, but those two thoughts just got connected, all right? Because you brought up post-truth.
Yes.
Which is decision-making based upon feelings and personal preference rather than a picture of objective reality, which is what we deliver. And so if we deliver objective reality, it's one thing to argue the objective reality. I've been in that room, all right? But it's quite another thing that I don't have to make a decision on objective reality. And the definition of post-truth is I can make a decision based upon feelings and preference. And that is really an existential threat to the craft.
So I think one of the
Well said.
unfortunate realities as a current member of the intelligence community is, John, your incredibly well-articulated point about when the first customer questions what we do and the manner in which we do it. And it was the both. We're used to having our work questioned. That's the nature of intelligence. That makes intelligence better when it is questioned. Questioning the integrity and the motivations is difficult. What I can say is that we probably spend more time as an intelligence community with this president than I've seen over years, actual time, in conversation, in presenting it. And I think the respect for the craft of the women and men of the intelligence community and the role in those settings is very well recognized, understood. It's the coupling of the public and that private truth that I think we have to work on for the American people.
That's good news. It's not meant for you, all right? No. But I've got to say, so did you wiretap Trump Tower?
No, I did not.
Okay. I didn't think so.
Judge Webster, this conversation with the American people.
I have to tell you, I'm barely hearing, so I can walk over there.
So Porter is going to help me convey.
If I can hear you.
This conversation with the American people.
Conversation with the American people. How should we have a conversation with the American people about the brilliance, the need of intelligence, and the credibility?
I'm answering it, and another thing that you have to take into account is in our work the importance of the availability of secrecy to get our job done in the right way. Sometimes that's mistaken. The purpose of intelligence is to gauge the intentions and the capabilities of our adversaries. Not the sole purpose, but the important function that we're talking about today. We have to do that in a way that the American people can have confidence in the objectivity with which we have approached that assignment. And I had some disappointing experiences at top leadership on the political side, on the policy-making side, for people who assumed if you don't agree with me, you're cooking the books, regardless of how accurate it might be. And I remember that worst experience I mentioned at the beginning of your question on whether to go to Desert Storm from Desert Shield or not. President Bush wisely, this may partly address your question to show the problem involved, contacted his chief advisor, General Scowcroft, to summon a meeting of all of us and all of the political fact people who were making policy judgments about the question of how far along had we gone and how far had the government gone in accomplishing his threshold requirements to engage in Desert Storm. It's probably one of the worst meetings I ever attended. They summoned in my first assistant on space imagery, a general officer who wouldn't know a political issue if he saw one, and accused him of not wanting to go to war because obviously his reports didn't jibe with the totalitarian that was coming the other direction. Not one, I'm talking about people I admire, Colin Powell being one, not one of them stepped in to speak for the general that I'm talking about, who's still a very good friend of mine, and I respect him completely. He was reporting accurately what the totality of our intelligence community did. He didn't understand what they were talking about. And we have to be able to break through that kind of distrust and uncertainty before we can take a case to the American people by having a conversation in public. Fortunately, that's history. And I think that basically we are back to a better relationship, particularly at some levels in the current administration, if I can speak that way. Best example, when President Trump said, "Isn't it wonderful, now we can go back to waterboarding?" And General Mattis said, "Didn't do anything for me." And President Trump took his advice wisely. Right. That kind of honesty and relationship has to exist at all levels, and until it does, I don't think the conversation with the public is going to go very far, but it's something we have. I started off by saying credibility is our greatest threat, and we've got to work at that seriously and do it in ways that make sense, whether it involves bringing outside committees in or creating other avenues of presentation. I don't really know the answer to that, but it is. We have to be realistic in understanding that people tend to assume if you don't agree with them, you must have a different policy position, not that you have facts that take you in another direction.
Very good. All right, we're going to ask one more. That was a very good answer. One more question. You're going to respond in a tweet. 144
144
characters. Yeah, exactly. And then we're going to open it up to you, so get your questions ready. We have a bunch of emergent leaders in this room. They may not even know it, but they're going to one day be sitting up talking about the world that they have led. What's the most important lesson you learned in your tenure? Most important lesson? And what advice would you give to these young leaders sitting in this room?
Tweets are now 280 characters, aren't they? I think God help us if they go to 280 as a country. just saying.
So, you know, this is how funny this is. This is how apolitical I am. I didn't even realize I was walking into that.
Yes, right, okay. Two things. One is humility. Aspiring professionals may be the greatest upcoming expert on a particular country or an issue, but if you're a real intelligence professional who understands the craft, you realize how much you don't know, how much there is to know, and how much there is to learn. And when I think back in my career, there are many times that I was amazed at just how little I actually knew and how much knowledge, and from knowledge comes wisdom. And wisdom is something that's acquired over time. The second thing is teamwork. Mike Hayden does a great job of lots of sports analogies. I played a lot of basketball growing up. I played in a lot of teams, and some teams had hot shots, and they weren't championship teams. The teams that worked together, that all relied upon one another and empowered one another, those were the teams that excelled and were champions. Same thing is true in the intelligence community. Same thing is true in CIA. And that's why when I was at CIA, I tried to make sure that CIA officers were able to work as much as possible as teams, because their responsibility is to make sure that their contribution is going to empower the rest of the agency, the rest of the community, and the U.S. government, and that they need to understand how the rest of the agency community can empower them as playing as a team. Humility and teamwork, if that are going to be the things that are going to drive our aspiring professionals, I think we are destined for success.
Judge Webster, best lesson, best advice.
All right. Let me draw from two poems dear to my heart. Truth, crushed to earth, shall rise again. The eternal years of God are hers, while error, wounded, falls to earth and dies among its worshipers. Secondly, on the walls of the agency, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. If you are guided in those motivations, you are rendering a significant service to your country.
Sorry, Porter. You have to follow that.
I can't. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is about the only thing I can remember. I would say that the most important thing I learned is something I learned a long, long time ago when I signed up for the agency in the 1950s, and that was the quality of the people in the intelligence world that we have is absolutely exceptional. There are very few, exceptions to that. There are always, you're going to find a problem somewhere. But the dedication of people who will go out without any promise of, public reward or approbation or something coming along is to me a remarkable thing. And I found that still when I went back to the agency as a director, and I thought, I don't know how we've been fortunate enough as a country to have this, but it is something we need to appreciate and nourish. Now the problem is, as you do that, you run the risk of exposing them to all the brickbats of public censure when something goes wrong, and that inevitably happens. But I think by and large, I am so positive about our country and our ability to do things and lead and do the right stuff and be the force for good. And I think a large, large part of it is our intelligence community. And that's the most important thing I learned, and I still follow it very closely every day, and I'm proud every day.
All right, Mike, bring us home.
So my extended tweet would be take heart. American espionage is not just compatible with our democracy, it's essential to our democracy. Frightened people don't make good Democrats or Republicans, small d, small r, all right? Frightened people begin to gnaw on their neighbors' liberties and privacies, and they get really scared, they start to gnaw on their own. So the successful accomplishment of our task doesn't just keep America safe, it keeps America free.
Perfect.
Well done.
All right, y'all have any questions for this remarkable group? Bring up the lights.
Oh, lots of
Let me-
Whoa.
There are people in the audience.
Yeah.
There are, I know. Let me adjust my eyes.
Good luck.
There's a lot of discussion about the need for secrecy in the intelligence community. There's also a need for transparency. How do you balance the two?
That's a great question.
Okay.
Who wants to go?
Well, I was on the chairman of the Oversight Committee on the Hill for the House for a long time, and we had to wrestle with this. It was always whether our job was to overlook or look over. And it came down to both, actually, building that trust. And I would put it this way. There is a perception in the public that there is a right for everybody to know everything. That's something that the First Amendment people, the press puts out. Everybody has a right. The public has a right to know. Except Congress has created some laws that said there are some stuff that's legitimately classified, and you don't have a right to know that right now. Maybe 25 years or sometime later, but you don't have a right now. Just like there's lawyer-client privilege, doctor-client privilege, patient privilege. Those are things that we're aware of. This debate of the yin and the yang of the transparency on the one side, which the intelligence community will tell you is great. We'd like to have that information out there as much as we can give you, but without doing damage to our operations or our capabilities over here. And that's a judgment call, and it isn't always right. So the answer is you actually need both. I bias default towards transparency if I can, but I'm awfully careful about ever mentioning names of anybody in the intelligence community because I sure don't want to blow anybody's cover.
Yeah, it's a question. I agree totally with Porter. It's a condition to be managed, not a problem to be solved, and you make individual decisions. But I would suggest that the fulcrum on that balance, all right, is moving in the direction that we're required to be a bit more transparent, again, as I described, because we exist in a broader society, which we cannot insist accommodate us. We have to somewhat accommodate to it. And so we're just probably going to have to be a little more transparent in the future than we were comfortable with being in the past in order, again, I repeat, to get the legitimacy, the validation of the population we serve.
That has been the trend,
Yeah.
certainly over the years.
Third row here. Someone's coming to you.
Wonderful panel, thank you. The question is, ever since the dawn of time in warfare, disinformation has been pivotal for any country that's launching war, and but they didn't have social media back then. Now that we're seeing the reemergence of disinformation in the form of fake news, what is the role of the CIA specifically and the intelligence community at large in tackling that issue? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll try and translate and see if I get it right. Forever there has been propaganda, people trying to manage a message. We haven't seen, however, the reach and the volume and the scope that we have of the social media. So what is the role of the Central Intelligence Agency in helping manage the perception of that fake news? Did I get that about right? Yeah. What's the role of the intelligence community in countering this disinformation?
So I'm going to jump in because I want to congratulate John. You be heroic in grabbing the policymakers by the lapels and say, this is what's going on. Now, we don't counter the news, we don't argue back, we don't conduct public diplomacy, but identifying that a foreign nation is attempting to manipulate legitimate political processes here is a classic intelligence function that I think the agency, the community performed very well in the past year.
Yeah, the troika last year of CIA, NSA, and FBI, the most important agencies that are going to help defend this country, in terms of the assaults in the digital domain, worked so closely together in order to try to understand, to uncover, and to thwart what the Russians were doing. Now, there are many different manifestations of Russian intelligence activities in that digital domain that we talked about in the intelligence community assessment that came out. But now, as you're seeing more things coming out in the press about the personas and other types of things that had Russian pedigree to it, it just demonstrates how vulnerable that environment is to those who want to do us harm. And I must tell you that a lot of the intelligence services around the globe either have the indigenous capabilities to do that, or they're tapping into various entities that have the capability to very quickly put things out on the various social media platforms and purport to be U.S. persons, U.S. organizations, whatever. It's going to be a continual challenge, and it says, I think going back to some of the things that Porter said earlier, that is the challenge of, I think, of the next decade, is trying to do what we can to ensure the security of that environment, but at the same time protect privacy and civil liberties, because our future security and our prosperity really depends on it. And unfortunately, a lot of our adversaries are taking full advantage of the openness of our society, the openness of that medium.
I think, from my perspective, this issue demonstrates that move toward transparency and the beneficial move, because that report, made public, has forced a dialogue and a recognition that it isn't just the government. So you see now what Facebook is doing in order to be a part of this solution. You see awareness in the populace about this happening to it, and you see the potential for diminishing effect. So this is one of those, and again, I don't want it to be just a complimentary session for John Brennan, but this decision to make things open and public so that the whole of the community, particularly in a digital environment, can be involved, I think is important. All right, what else we got? I'm going to go to a different section because I see you all, and the group on this side is going to be very upset with me. How about halfway down on the left?
Specifically for General Hayden, John Sanford, retired Air Force. I worked for you on the in-stock floor back in 2004. Two-parter. Since you were able to be the director of NSA and the director of CIA, where do you see our interagency cooperation going in the future as far as us being able to get the information out there? Because we were need to know, and then we were need to share after 9/11. Where are we going now with everything that's happened? And then my follow-on is, could I get you to sign my book?
I'll sign any book anybody buys. So on the information sharing thing, all right, even in the dark days of September 10th, 2001, if we were marking on the curve, we'd be on a roll, all right? I mean, our intelligence community, even pre-9/11, was actually pretty integrated compared to even the best elsewhere. But, you know, neither God nor our citizenry mark us on the curve, all right? They mark us on an absolute scale, and therefore it was insufficient. And I do think we've made remarkable progress. We haven't talked about the DNI and all that, but you've had two DNIs who have set in motion a couple of things that get this better. You had Mike McConnell with the Joint Duty Initiative, and that changes us over a long period of time. And then you had Jim Clapper with EyeSight, the IT integration, that will change us over a long period of time. So I think the trend lines here are good. Here's the problem, and it's an epistemological problem. So this is my SIGINT cylinder of excellence, not stovepipe, SIGINT cylinder of excellence,
I'm with you.
okay? And human cylinder of excellence. We're not hiding the ball on anybody. But you know, if I give all my stuff here to these guys over here, they're going to drown. All right? And so there's a certain point at which information becomes relevant, that the dots come together. But there are still dots down here that don't come together in my cylinder. But if I could somehow expose them to the dots below threshold in this cylinder, I could have a eureka moment. And so we're struggling, and this is a forever problem. We're struggling. How do I get the stray points of light that aren't ready for prime time available to the other customers without just overwhelming them in noise? So that's just a continuous process. But I frankly reject its bureaucratic turf or selfishness or power. it's fundamentally this epistemological issue.
But there's so much more cross-fertilization now also in the work units. I would go down into my CIA units and I'd be talking to people and say, oh, so where did you start in the agency? No, I'm an NSA officer. You're an NSA officer. Sitting cheek to jowl, and that's where we have in, whether it be counterintelligence, counterterrorism, other issues across the board. I think more of that integration of effort, you can do it at our respective areas, but as Mike says, you need to understand at the working level just the value and the relevance of the other intelligence community agencies' capabilities, collection assets, because then there is that enlightenment. You can see, oh my goodness, you can do that? And marrying it then together between humans and technical intelligence, it does great magic in many respects.
All right, last question, front row. You have 30 seconds to be worth it. Hurry up.
This thing better go off.
It better be worth it.
I work in the information technology industry, and over the years, we've helped the intelligence sector a great deal, but there's always the suspicion among our foreign customers that we're too close to the intelligence community. Any idea on how the U.S. computer industry and networking industry can assure our foreign customers that we're not too close to you?
I'll take that one. Everyone has their own interests. Our foreign entities sometimes need to believe that in order to achieve advantage. I think continuing on the path of being true, have a clear U.S. policy, be mindful of the value proposition of the industrial base, and just recognizing that there are always going to be competitive imperatives that are forcing one to push toward the other. Ladies and gentlemen, what an amazing panel.
Thank you. Thank you.